Welcome to my latest video, drawing a horse's eye in real time and time lapse. When you select an image, sometimes it's quite dark, so I'm just showing you here how I'm changing the curves in Photoshop just to lighten that eye up so I can see a little bit more detail. I'm not necessarily going to be drawing the eye exactly as it is in the lightened version, but here I can see the pupil. I can see some of the detail around the eye a little bit better, and the form of the eye, so it's easier for me to convert that into a drawing. I then use the original image and the lightened image, so that I can get the tonal values right and I can get the detail in there as well. So starting off with, this is a 3 times time lapse. Starting off with I think it's a warm grey 5 or a 6. I'm literally just outlining the eye, the darkest areas, not using a huge amount of pressure, still very, very light pressure, and quite a sketchy way of using my pencil, just to get some really, really soft lines in there, increasing the pressure slightly where I need to do, where there are some really, really dark areas, but this is all done in the warm grey. Just adding in those the shadowy bits and getting. I always start with the eye around the edge just to get that form and the shape and everything spot on before I start to add anything inside the eye, if you like. It gives me something to work with, and if you get the outside correct, and the shape and everything right, then it's much easier to get the inside bit, rather than doing all of the inside and doing all of that work and then finding that actually you've got to change the shape of it. It's easier for me to do everything around the outside first, and this is all still the warm grey is all one pencil. It's the Faber Castell Polychromos warm grey. I think it's a 5 or a 6, and just changing the pressure slightly as I'm going along. Like I say, very sketchy lines just to add. There's a lot of texture around a horse's eye. There's some horses have more skin showing round their eyes, some are really quite hairy, and it's using this very light sketchy touch. It just helps to replicate that sort of the roughness of the skin. This is a burnt ochre, Polychromos again, just lightly adding in some of the tonal values around the eye. This obviously will change once I move into the drawing, and I'll add darker areas in there, but this is literally just the first layer, so it's very light, just sort of sketching in those tonal values. The Pastelmat board that I'm using, the white, it's quite different to the darker colours of the paper, which is a bit odd because it all should be the same, but it takes fewer layers. And you kind of have to use a bit of a different process when you're using your pencils on them. So it's still about layering, but you have to take into account that it will take fewer layers than the darker colours. And I find it's harder to do the light over dark. You can get light over dark, but you're not going to get the bright white. So I use a scalpel to pull out pigment if I need to do, and I also use the Scotch Magic tape, which we'll see me use in here a little bit later on in the video. So again, I've put the tonal values down in the burnt ochre, and then I'm coming back again with the warm grey 5 or 6 in here, just to start adding a little bit more detail, still using that really, really, really light touch. I think that's really key, especially with the Pastelmat, not to go in really hard to begin with. It's all really light. If you've got some really dark areas, obviously like the corner of this eye, it's really quite dark. You can go in with a harder pressure, but just be aware that sometimes you might have to lift it off. So a lighter pressure is better than like really, using a really firm grip and really pushing down on the paper. When I'm adding in the shadow area in like a crease of an eye or something like that. I'm not looking for a really hard edge. I'm looking for a softer edge. So what I'll tend to do is I'll use my pencil in the direction of the fur and the actual crease of the eye. So there'll be like a little bit of a curve there, you know, which really helps to, here you can see there, it really helps to sort of indicate that that's a rounded crease of the eye, rather than sort of like putting a hard pencil line in there. And I think that again is key when drawing animals, you know, especially the eyes, and you know, where there are sort of like soft folds or, you know, anything like that. So again, so I'm using the Scotch Magic tape here. You know, I'm just lifting off some of that pigment. It comes off really well when you haven't got that many layers down. And actually, it's not that I made a mistake. You know, I'm putting the layers down, I'm lifting it off, I'm adding more, I'm lifting it off, and that's what helps to build the depth in the piece. You know, and it just helps to add that little bit of texture and everything as well. So I find the Scotch Magic tape really useful. This is I'm going in with black, the Polychromos black now, which it's not a pencil I use a huge amount. Obviously for the really dark areas it's great, but I use it over the top of other colours. I think I've mentioned in previous videos. You know, because it just adds a richness. I also use black very lightly to get sort of like a bit of a you know, a grey colour as well. So this is a cold grey, 1 or 2, fantastic for blending. So going over the top of darker colours just really helps to blend out you know, the pigment, especially on the pastel mat, which is quite a it's not particularly textured, but it's quite rough. It's quite sort of velvety, and your first layers that you put down, they're quite they can look really quite rough, and it's quite disconcerting actually when you first start using pastel mat. It's like, oh my god, you know, what have I done? But when you start to build the layers, you can really smooth out all of those colours, and using the light over the dark you know, is a really good way of doing that. So dark indigo now, I always use dark indigo to plot out sort of like the iris, the pupil, you know, put the darks into the eye. And you can see on the lightened image that the pupil is actually sort of like a bluey colour. Actually, there's a lot of red in there as well. So I use the dark indigo. I find that a really great colour just to plot all of those dark areas in the eye. And then I can move over the top of it and add other colours in. When I'm drawing eyes, obviously it needs to reflect the animal that I'm drawing. I don't necessarily copy the photograph exactly. On this one, the original is quite dark, which is why I've lightened it so that I can see the detail, where the pupil sits, all that type of thing. But what I find is to sort of like add my own expression, I suppose, into the eye, so it still reflects the animal, but sometimes the eye that I'm given in the photograph just doesn't sit right. So just adding a little bit extra just really helps. I mean, sometimes you get a great eye and you've got fantastic reflection in there, and you know, you almost copy it exactly. But with this one, I'm kind of using the original image and the lightened image, and I'm kind of using my own sort of like artistic license, if you like, just to add you know, different bits. The highlights the same, the pupils in the same position, but the colours might be slightly different. Just it's just my impression of the eye, I suppose. So again, this is the Caput Mortem Violet that I'm using here. It's a really dark, it's like a dark bluey red, I suppose. One of my favourite colours. It's brilliant. It's brilliant for fur. It's brilliant for you know, in this eye obviously there's sort of like some dark sort of orangey browns and everything, and I'm using this instead of the black around the eye, because it just gives it that little bit extra. Again, this is the cadmium orange that I'm using now, previously, and it's just a fabulous colour to add extra highlighty bits into an eye. I'm still using this sort of sketchy stroke, just because I don't want any harsh lines in there. I want it to look painterly. The paper, it almost needs a painterly effect. You know, I can get really fine detail into there, but you just get this lovely sort of soft feel with the pastel mat. It's a really great surface to work with. Again, we're going back into with the dark indigo. It's either dark indigo or caput mortem violet again, just to sort of darken those dark areas. You know, and I'm following the reference photo. And like I said, I'm adding my own little bits as well. Obviously, you've got to keep the form right, you know, and going in again, going over the areas like in the eyelids here, you know, darkening them. You might then go in and take some bits off just to lighten them again, and then go back in and darken them. You know, it's just kind of. It's how it works out. You know, when I draw an eye, I don't just go right and just follow the lines exactly. It has to have some feel in there, and this is how I kind of do it. You know, with this sort of sketchy feel with the pencil. Still really light pressure, and just building those layers up. You know, using. I think this is black again here, just to sort of build those areas up. And again, this is the caput mortem violet. You know, there's some sort of dark browny bits up on that eyelid. And it's a great colour, and you can see there again how I'm going with the direction of the fur, and I'm creating that lovely rounded edge rather than a hard edge, which I've said before is just really important. You know, because you don't have any harsh lines on animals. You know, it just doesn't happen. You've got to have those lovely soft round edges. So this is the ivory that I'm using here, just to kind of lighten up the eyelids slightly. I don't try and match my colours exactly to the image that I'm using, and again using the Scotch Magic tape just to lift off some of those colours. You know, it's great. Pastel mat's brilliant. You know, if you go a little bit wrong, I don't tend to use an eraser. I use a putty eraser, and I use the Scotch Magic tape just to lift out little bits. You know, and if you do go wrong, and this is a great example of me sort of adding a pencil where I shouldn't have done, so I'm lifting off the pigment, and then I'm going back in and putting it back in. You know, and the Scotch Magic tape is fantastic for that. Do be careful though with if you're using it on different papers. Just do a bit of a test, you know, just to make sure that it doesn't take the surface of your paper off. I tend to sort of if you put it on fresh from the roll, it will take off quite a lot of pigment, and a pigment around where you're taking off. But if you kind of dab it on your hand a little bit and take off some of that stickiness, you know, you can get some really nice effects with that as well. And you can also use the eraser shield to get, you know, if you've got some tiny little lines and you don't want anything else to be affected, the Faber Castell eraser shield is fantastic for that. So yeah, and going in here, I think this is burnt sienna that I'm just sort of adding. Again, really sketchy, and you can see how I'm not covering the whole of the surface. I'm sort of almost trying to replicate those little tiny short velvety hairs around the horse's eye. This isn't me going wrong. This is me just softening the colour that I've just put in. The putty erasers are actually really good for blending as well on the pastel mat. You know, you can put a colour down and then sort of almost run your putty eraser down, and it'll just blend it a little bit, which is great. And then again, this is the cold grey one. What I find is that if I use this over the top of a few layers of quite dark colour, it will add like almost like a sheen, which is fantastic for eyes because it just makes them look sort of glassy and real. You know, so I'll do that, you know, just to help that glassiness of the eye. This is actually a Pablo, I think it's a light ochre that I've used just for the sort of, there's some yellowy areas around the eye. I think that's the only Pablo I've used on this piece. And then we're back to the burnt ochre, you know, again, just to sort of like add little little details into there, and again, putty eraser. What's happened here is I've actually put too much shadow into the corner of this eye, so I'm just lifting that out, and then just by adding the Caput Mortuum Violet up onto the top of that eyelid, I can just slightly change the shape of the eye. It's amazing how one tiny mark can just change a whole drawing. This is the finished eye. I haven't finished the piece yet, but I probably won't go in and make any more changes to this. I'm happy with how it is. Thank you for watching the video, and please subscribe.